Mr. Speaker, first let me congratulate you and the Deputy Speaker on your elections to lead the business of this Honorable House. And I continue to trust that your decisions will inure to the benefit of all of us in this House and the people of Guyana whom we serve. Mr. Speaker, let me also congratulate all of the MPs who serve in this Honorable House, who have been elected from the list of electors that were submitted to the Elections Commission and who now have the opportunity to serve the people in the legislative branch of government. I more particularly want to thank the MPs on this side, my own MPs, who throughout the last 5 days of debate have done an excellent job. The people of Guyana will be proud of you, as I am indeed very proud of you. Mr. Speaker, before I get into what I really want to say, I must offer some brief remarks on what the last speaker said. It is unfortunate that he did not choose to come into these chambers and prattle as he did, and so, Mr. Speaker, we really wish he would have been here, because those statements which he made are statements which certainly must require some response. Mr. Speaker, I chose this afternoon to take a different path. Not the path of confrontation as the last speaker did, the path of threatening people about investigations which he will do. That is not going to affect us. It's not going to affect the stridency. And my friend over there is accustomed to that place. He's been there already, so it's not a problem. Mr. Speaker, I believe that this afternoon we are looking at some very important matters in the life of this country. And I want to commend the staff of the Budget Office who have done a fairly good job in presenting this budget. Mr. Speaker, I want to also commiserate with the family of Joel and Isaiah Henry and Harry Singh. Their gruesome death diminishes all of us. When a Guyanese life is lost anywhere, a Guyanese life is lost everywhere. And we cherish and we value the life of every Guyanese. More so, my friend over there who I had to save in the 2015 elections. Mr. Speaker, the budget in some regards identify priorities of our time. And I will name those priorities as public security, social cohesion, and COVID-19 pandemic. All of these require, in my view, Mr. Speaker, a national response in order that our country can progress and prosper. Unfortunately, in Budget 2020, while the writers recognize that this is an important priority, they gave it low priority over the needs of the ordinary people, but compensating the political friends and giving rewards for those who help them. They have sought to compensate their political base and those whom they wish to target while neglecting the people and the areas they perceive to be coalition support base. Mr. Speaker, this is a raw budget. This is one which, by the way the resources are allocated, can only serve to further divide us. Mr. Speaker, how do you explain in 47 days in office, you have dismissed over 100 persons, mainly Afro-Guyanese and single-parent women? How do we explain that? How does the gentleman who spoke before me, that speaks about cohesion, how does he explain that? That is what we need to know. Mr. Speaker, many persons who were well skilled in the positions where they had were actually removed just like that in one fell swoop. We spoke about Dr. Adams. We spoke about Amanza Walton Desir. We spoke about many other persons who are well qualified and who are the best persons for these jobs, but are removed simply because there's a perception that they support the APNU-AFC. Mr. Speaker, our intention has always been for the good of this country. And that is why all of our budgets have always been about the good life. But Mr. Speaker, when the Minister of Agriculture stands here in this honorable house and says that they're going to downsize the headquarters of Gaisuko because there are too many people there, and in the same breath, he is talking about reopening estates. When you send home all these technical officers, who are the ones that are going to do the studies? Who are the ones that are going to fix the estates? What sense does that make? It's backward thinking. And then at the same time, Mr. Speaker, at the same time, you are giving to the Gaisuko $600 million to deal with salaries. Mr. Speaker, is this not the same Gaisuko workers that we actually gave all of the benefits when they left? Mr. Speaker?
Go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, I know we have no issues with heckling, but when the tone is vile and vulgar, we have a problem with it. If you can caution the honourable member on the government side to exercise restraint with this language being used in this honourable house.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition, please proceed. Honourable members, please.
Mr. Speaker, before I proceed much further, permit me please to respond to some statements made by the other side, which seeks to allude as to why we are here in this present situation. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Member, Mr. Edgell, in reading the three-man budget, where none of them can identify themselves as the Minister of Finance, one wonders, is there something in that budget that none of them want to identify themselves with? None of them want to take ownership of? Who? Like who? Mr. Speaker, at page 4 of the budget speech, Mr. Edgell writes, and I quote, "We witnessed an unprecedented assault on lawful governance, on the Constitution, the rule of law, and on parliamentary governance, which culminated with a globally publicized attempt at rigging the March 2nd, 2020 elections." He goes on to say, "The vulgar display of authoritarianism cost taxpayers tens of millions of dollars to defend the indefensible." The National Assembly and the country will certainly hear more about this as time permits, as investigations are ongoing. That's all they're doing. Investigating, investigating, investigating. Govern! That's why you're there. Mr. Speaker, various other speakers, including the Honorable Minister Joseph Hamilton, I'm sorry he's not here to hear me now, the Honorable Minister Vikram Bharat, and most recently, the Honorable Rosen Ben, Minister of Home Affairs. This minister is a special person. He ought not have been here given responsibility for public security, as by his own utterances in the public and in this House, he appears to be a menace to public security rather than a minister. He should be minding affairs at home and allow someone with a temperament and aptitude to lead this critical ministry at this stage of our nation's development. His choice is the worst that this government has made, and he knows no bounds to his jurisdiction as a minister when it comes to police investigations. This honorable member, Mr. Speaker, regaled the House with all the PVP propaganda concerning the March 2nd, 2020 elections. And even when I rose to seek a point of clarification about a reckless statement he had made concerning President Granger on my visit to the west coast of Barbados, he had not the decency to yield and allow for the point of order to be dealt with. Mr. Speaker, in light of all of those unchallenged assertions of rigging by the PPP that has gone unanswered, it is my duty to put on that record, Mr. Speaker, the facts of the matter. Mr. Speaker, one thing that we have to understand is, as my friend Kemraj Ramjatan always says, the PVP is about control freakism. And I do not expect all of what I say here to actually get onto NCN. In fact, nothing what our MPs say in the debates, they carry in the news. But they must be put on notice that that is a national resource and that we will not sit idly by and allow the NCN to marginalize us. We represent the people of Guyana, and our voices must be heard on those resources. Mr. Speaker, let me put on record these facts. that after the March 2nd, 2020 elections, all of the reports that came out was that this was a peaceful, fair election. All of the reports that came out. And then when the tabulation of those results were taking place for Region 4, the PPP hierarchy barged in on that office and almost broke it up. Broke it up. Mr. Speaker, the cultural news of the May the 5th speaks to what the honorable member, Mr. Byron Jagyo, said to them. He said, amidst the commotion, the leader of the People's Progressive Party, Byron Jagyo, told the media that his party objected to the declaration since there was no adequate verification conducted prior. That is what he said. And then, of course, in the following day, in the Chronicle, it speaks to exactly what took place. Opposition storming of Decorum building. And you were one of them, you over there. You should have been in the lockups. You were there. You were there. They stormed the building. All of the leaders of there. What were you doing there? What were you doing there? All of the nonsense that went on after that, Mr. Speaker. Policemen being threatened, doors being kicked down, and all of that. All of this in the presence of the cameras and in the presence of the international observers. All of that. And yet, the honourable member has the temerity to say that it was we who were the ones who were doing that. We were the ones who were doing that. Mr. Speaker, immediately after that, the PPP went to court. And they spoke a lot here about how many cases we went, how much we lost, how often we went to court. But let me tell you, Holiday alone was there 3 times with Harmon and Dalal. 3 times. The last time the Chief Justice said to him, Mr. Nandalal, you are wasting the court time. This has nowhere to go. This has nowhere to go. And so the matter was put down. But what has happened, Mr. Speaker, is that this action caused the chairman of the Elections Commission to commit herself not to take certain steps on the penalty of being perjured, on the penalty of being in contempt of the court. So, Mr. Speaker, this was a halo that was held over the head of Guyanese for over 3 months. For over 3 months. There was no case. The Chief Justice told Nandalal he has no case. No case. After 3 months. After 3 months when the recount started here in July. That is when he came and withdrew the case. No evidence. But that was the halo which was held over the head of Guyanese people. And in the meantime, there was a declaration made by the Chief Elections Officer, handing it to the Chairman of the Elections Commission, which showed that the APNU-AFC had the most votes. They went to court again. And then, of course, the chairman of CARICOM got involved and met with the President David Granger and Honorable Bar Jagdeo, as the leader of the opposition. You are nowhere there. You are nowhere there. Mr. Speaker, at that meeting, there was an agreement that there was going to be a recount. The first attempt at doing so met with some legal challenges, and therefore that process was scuttled. The second time, of course, the process went ahead, and an Order 60 of 2020, issued by the Elections Commission and gazetted, controlled the recount that was going to take place right here. Mr. Speaker, at that time, when this recount started, we were always of the view that the PPP were always engaged in fraudulent activities. But, Mr. Speaker, this Artichon Conference Center is what dispelled all doubts. All doubts were dispelled. And so, Mr. Speaker, when these boxes started opening one after the other, this is where the fraud started jumping out so like crapo. The jump also, jumping also, all these different things. Statement of poll that they are asking about. Let me make a point on that, Mr. Speaker, since the Honorable Heckler over there is talking about statements of poll. That, Mr. Speaker, this party over here had created statements of polls and circulated it on the internet even before people had voted, even before, dated the 28th of February, and circulated, or 29th of February, whatever it was, circulated. Are you talking about statements of polls? So, Mr. Speaker, when the recounts were done, it was clear to all of the world that this was what we call the epicenter of electoral fraud, the east coast of Demerara. The epicenter of electoral fraud. You had at least 47 boxes with over 11,500 votes, for which there was no statutory documents. People who come out from the grave, like my friend over there, to vote. And we have the evidence of the death certificates. People who were not in Guyana at that time, who were overseas residents and voted. So many other issues, Mr. Speaker, that the People's Progressive Party ought to hide their heads in shame. In shame. And the Honorable Member Bar Jagdeo talking about people being sorry and all of that. He should be the one that is sorry, that he's taking shot on the will of the Guyanese people by fraud and sitting there in office. Everybody knows it. It came out right here. The report of the Chief Elections Officer into the recount showed that the tabulation, the matrix of the tabulation had one figure, and then of course there was the actual, the issues which arose. And that when you were to get the credible votes, you had to then take out from the vote that was here called the matrix or the tabulation, and to take out all of these issues which arose here. Mr. Speaker, as one of the members of the APNU-AFC team, I met right here in this center, in this room, with the chairman of the Elections Commission and her chair and the commissioners. And we raised all of these matters. We asked that they inquire into them. They said, yes, we're going to give you what they call a basket of issues, and that they were going to deal with them. I personally wrote and asked that we get a position on these matters before the end of the recount. We were told yes. We were told yes. Mr. Speaker, the chairman and our commissioners agreed that these issues which we were raising, that they were accurate and that they will be dealt with. But then what happened? All sorts of circulation things start happening right here. Right here. Right here. I'm glad you know it. Bandits. That's what it was. And so, Mr. Speaker, on one afternoon, when everybody agreed that these 11,000 something votes got to be packed, by the next morning, it changed. And that these things are going to park the mode is right in. It drives straight into the rest of the vote. So, Mr. Speaker, the 233,000 or so votes that were awarded to the PPP included all of these different things. And so you know, you are sitting on a time bomb. You are sitting on a time bomb. The petitions have been filed. And so enjoy your little short tenure over there. I don't know if you can get back the next time over here, because you might be qualified. Right? But we will be over there once these things are done. Mr. Speaker, it is important that we understand in this country that the PPP were awarded 233,000 votes or thereabouts, and we 217,926, right? So you over there cannot operate as if 233,000 is equal to 100%, and that 217,000 is equal to zero.
Honorable member, I just want to caution about you over there. You know, we've been sticking with the parliamentary language of honorable members over there.
Mr. Speaker, I heard you, and I will refrain from that. But I would ask that you also caution the heckler over there. It's making it difficult for me to even hear you.
Order.
Please.
You have to be fair.
Mr. Speaker, let me continue that the political and security environment which now exists in Guyana requires political will and the budgetary allocations to help heal the wounds in our society. Mr. Speaker, the PPP decision to throw cold water on social cohesion, the appointment of Robeson Ben as Minister of Home Affairs, the reorganization of the Guyana Police Force, and to bring back senior officers who are discredited and place them in senior critical positions the restructuring of the Guyana Defense Force, all point to a mindset that says the PPP will not be interested in any compromise in moving forward with the affairs of Guyana. That's what it says. It is either their way or the USA. That's what it is. It's either their way or the USA. Mr. Speaker, in one fell swoop, the Department of Social Cohesion was dismantled. And all of the skills which were acquired and developed over the last 5 years gone to waste. How will we solve, Mr. Speaker, the problems of society in this way? Mr. Speaker, the members of the other side must remember that they said 233,000 is not 100%, and that 217,000 is not 0%. That in this House, we will wage an unrelenting struggle to ensure not only justice for the people, but equality in how the national patrimony of this country is allocated. Mr. Speaker, last Sunday, I had a chance meeting with President Irfan Ali at the funeral of Isaiah and Joel Henry. And he told me something there, which I would not repeat, so that Mr. Gentleman over there will go make a story out of it. He told me something. And my response to him was that we all in this country want peace. And I, as the leader of the opposition, am prepared to work with you for peace. But that equality and justice must also be given priority. President Ali agreed, and I trust that after his engagements with visiting dignitaries, there can be some meaningful dialogue in that matter. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we represent. We represent. And while in the language of some of my colleagues, they will also, I beg and I pray on all of this, these are just ways of speaking. But over here, we don't beg. We represent. Mr. Speaker, on the 2nd of September, when we were sworn in as MPs here, I made a public statement. And I said that we in the opposition will only support the government as it relates to issues of sovereignty of our nation, public security, and any other matter we determine to be in the public interest. We said that. And so let there be no doubts about it. Any issue that has to do with the sovereignty of our state, any issue that has to do with public security of this country, and any issue that has to do with what we determine to be in the public interest, we will support. We will support. Yes, Mr. Speaker, we are prepared to work with this government on these issues. However, certain things have to be done on the government side. First of all, the killers of Joel and Isaiah Henry and Harry Singh must be brought to justice. Mr. Speaker, we demand an update on this investigation and a speedy trial of suspects. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Home Affairs last night balked at the opportunity to give this House a report on this most important matter. Any minister worth his salt would have been happy to give the National Assembly an update on a matter that is important as this. Any minister worth his salt. Mr. Speaker, secondly, the relentless and pointless investigation of the Office of the Elections Commission and the charges, the trumped-up charges brought against Walter Lawrence, Keith Lowenfield, Mingo, and others of Decorum, that it should be withdrawn and discontinued. Mr. Speaker, thirdly, the oppressive police presence in some villages, particularly on the west coast of Berbice, should be reviewed. The presence appears to be oppressive in nature, and it should be reviewed. I'm not saying withdraw altogether, but they should review it. And the Prime Minister who's here, I know will take that matter up. Mr. Speaker, fourthly, constitutional reform must be treated as a priority. And Mr. Speaker, while that can take some time, we can examine a bipartisan bill that seeks to amend certain aspects of our electoral laws to take into consideration the findings of the CCJ and our own Court of Appeal and the High Court. Alternatively, Mr. Speaker, if we do not get buy-in from the government side on this matter, because we consider it so important, we will consult with civil society and bring a motion on this floor to that effect. Mr. Speaker, after the petitions are heard and determined, we want to say that we cannot go back to another elections with the same laws and with the same bloated list. It is a travesty. It's a travesty. We can't go back. We are prepared, Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House to support an upward review of allocations in this sector to facilitate these recommendations. We are prepared to do that. And so if the Minister of Finance wants to see how best we can sit and achieve that, achieve a sum put there to deal with constitutional reform, achieve a sum put there to deal with urgent matters which relate to the amendment of our electoral laws, we are prepared to work with you on that. Mr. Speaker, the second issue which I want to address in this budget is the question of the COVID-19 and the response to COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, our MPs on this side have done an excellent job in dealing with this matter. MP after MP did an excellent job in dealing with this COVID-19. The budget theme speaks to protecting our people in a COVID environment. But where in the budget did you place your emphasis? $150 million for frontline workers? Where is the plan, Mr. Speaker, that shows this budget is drafted upon a foundation that we are in a COVID environment? And therefore, every allocation in every sector must reflect that reality. If you're saying that this is the foundation of your budget, every sector must reflect it. Not just $150 million for full-time workers and $25,000 a household. That wouldn't work. The $25,000 will end up in Parderville 1, Parderville 2, and all these places. They're not entitled to it. The people who are vulnerable and require this, those are the ones that should get it. But this has been a lazy approach to budget arrangement. Lazy. Because in order for you to get to the vulnerable people, you have to do work. You have to do work which eliminates certain categories. You have to do all of that. We did all of that in the last 5 months of 2020. We did all of that. All of that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Ma, Mr. Region 3, gentlemen, you might have benefited from what we gave out too. Mr. Speaker, every allocation must be reflective of our current reality. Let me turn to the issue alluded earlier, which as a nation and the wider world, we are combating this global pandemic. Mr. Speaker, since the 2nd of August, COVID-19 has spiraled completely out of control in Guyana. And it has now reached catastrophic levels. Confirmed cases are skyrocketing. We have 1,000 something now. Right? They are skyrocketing. Deaths are piling up. I think we're 62 or something like that. They're piling up. Where is the Minister of Health on this? Where is he missing in action? Mr. Speaker, on August the 2nd, when we left office, after managing this pandemic for 5 months since patient zero on March 11th, there were 474 confirmed cases and 21 deaths from COVID-19. Today, a month and a half later, there are 1,958 confirmed cases and 58 deaths at that time, but I think it's 62 today. 62 deaths. For 5 months, Mr. Speaker, under the APNU-AFC coalition government, there are 474 confirmed cases. And in 6 weeks of this woeful administration, we now gone to at least 1,958. More than 1,484 since we left in 6 weeks. So, Ms., how are you managing COVID-19? How are you doing that? It saddens and troubles me, Mr. Speaker, deeply to have to quote these horrific figures. Mr. Speaker, but these are the facts. The PPP, they're unconscionably playing Russian roulette with the lives of the people of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, after months of pontificating, boasting, and lecturing, the PPP regime's management of the pandemic has been an unmitigated travesty. Guyanese are dying in record numbers. Guyanese are becoming infected in huge numbers. And Guyanese are living in fear all across this land. Whether it is the economy, security, or the pandemic, there is an absence of leadership on that side of the house. The Guyanese people have little confidence in you to manage the stewardship on this issue. Mr. Speaker, it is necessary to illustrate the stark difference in approach in our coalition government and the management of COVID-19 pandemic based on guesswork, politics, or profit as it is in that case. Ours was based on sound science, sound structured approach, and a comprehensive whole of government plan. Mr. Speaker, every ministry of the government had to submit a plan of action to the Secretariat, of which I was the chief executive officer, and the Prime Minister, who was in charge of the whole apparatus. We paid so much attention to it that we have placed our Prime Minister in charge of it. But so, Mr. Speaker, all of what happened in this country could have been reported on and responded on in a very short space of time because of that mechanism which we had in place. Every administrative region every administrative region had to provide a COVID-19 plan. All of the regions. And so on a weekly basis, they had to report on what was taking place in their region. Mr. Speaker, this is how you deal with a national plan. Mr. Speaker, this is how you allocate resources to a problem that you consider to be at that level. You have to plan. You don't sit down and guess and heckle and make noise like my friend over there. You have to sit and think and work it out. You have to plan. Mr. Speaker, on March the 14th, the Health Emergency Operations Center within the Ministry of Public Health was established and activated.
Comrade Speaker.
Honorable member, please, go ahead.
Comrade Speaker, I refer you to Standing Order 47, Order in the National Assembly and Committee. I made mention to you earlier in terms of the decay in which this assembly is going, with the loud shouts and vile and degrading heckling that is coming from this House, Comrade Speaker. I am fearful that the tone and language being used in this House, sir, would only serve to degrade this 12th Parliament of this country under your watch. I refer you, sir, to Standing Order 47-2 for your guidance, please, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, honorable member. Honorable members, please, we've come a far way over the last 4 days and over the last few hours. Please, let us keep our decorum and order in the National Assembly to a level that we will all be pleased with. Thank you very much.
Mr. Speaker, on the 16th of March, the President issued directions, President Grady issued directions under the Public Health Ordinance Act, authorizing the Minister of Health to take all appropriate measures to prevent and contain the spread of COVID-19. Regional COVID-19 task force were established in every administrative region. As I said, a national secretariat also was set up and working. And so, Mr. Speaker, we took a scientific, structured, and planned approach to managing COVID-19. And we are well on the way to flattening the curve. What has happened since August the 2nd, Mr. Speaker? No plan, a dismantling of the structures we put in place, a distancing from science, and the pandemic is running amok all over the country. Mr. Speaker, we are all aware of the reason why we are here and why you are here presiding in this manner. These proceedings, virtually, Mr. Speaker, is a testimony to what is happening now in our country. Regrettably, only this week, Mr. Speaker, 14 members of staff of this National Assembly were tested positive. We pray for their full and fast recovery, as we do, Mr. Speaker, for your recovery. But this sad and unfortunate wildfire spread of the pandemic, Mr. Speaker, is entirely as a result of poor and incoherent management by the PPP regime. What is doubly worse and will imperil our country in the months to come is that those who cobbled together this budget gave nothing but lip service to a COVID recovery plan. There's absolutely not a single hint of a COVID recovery plan in this budget. Mr. Speaker, it is important for me to contextualize the need for a dedicated, comprehensive COVID recovery plan. Every one of our CARICOM neighbors who have presented budgets during this period hinged their budgets on a COVID recovery plan. They, like the rest of the world, recognize that we cannot continue with business as usual after the pandemic. We are operating in a new normal in unprecedented times, and it will require a structured and programmed approach for our people to recover. The lives and livelihood of Guyanese have been adversely affected, Mr. Speaker, and a $25,000 handout will only get you some groceries for the short term. But what is the PP plan to get our economy going again and our people working again? There's no such plan in this budget. They have ignored it or avoided it because they do not possess the intellectual acumen or the economic capacity to produce such a plan. But what are our colleagues in the Caribbean doing, Mr. Speaker? Let's look a little bit abroad. They are pursuing structured COVID recovery-19 plans. I share with you for edification and to illustrate the deficiencies in this budget, two examples. One in Trinidad and Tobago and the other one in Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, the Trinidad and Tobago Finance Minister, Com Imbert, in his budget presentation last month stated, and I quote, "The macroeconomic stability and revival of growth in Trinidad and Tobago under the PNM government have been anchored on an economic reform program designed within a medium-term framework." He then announced the planned implementation of direct measures aimed at aiding their people recover from the ravages of the pandemic. They increased minimum wage. They increased minimum wage, granted incentives to the creative industry, and they are reviewing public pension with a view to increasing. And they made the entire agriculture industry tax-free. Real policies and measures to rebuild and revitalize the economy. In Jamaica, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance, Dr. Nigel Clark, in speaking to their COVID-19 plan, stated in his budget presentation, and I quote, "Policymakers around the world have been responding with fiscal and monetary stimuli, inclusive of tax cuts, reduction in interest rates, or increased expenditure to counteract these effects." End of quote. He then went on to announce a reduction in Jamaica's general consumption tax, their equivalent of our value-added tax, and a full-fledged COVID recovery program. Dr. Clark announced $2 billion Jamaican dollars for the expansion and intensification of the management of the pandemic, and a $7 billion Jamaican dollar COVID contingency to mitigate against the impact of the pandemic. We are able to provide these tax reductions, he said, and cushion a fiscal contingency buffer in the face of a global shock. Mr. Speaker, we desperately need here a COVID recovery plan. And Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we are prepared to lend some of the skills which are here to work with the government to ensure that we have a plan. Mr. Speaker, it is the health of our people that is important. And we do not see politics or side where this matter is concerned. This is a matter of national importance, and we are prepared to give our full support to it. It requires a whole of government approach. It requires that every administrative region must get involved. A one-time handout will not rescue our people and their livelihood. The planning and paperwork had already started under us. And rather than slash and burn, the minister should read and learn. Too much, Mr. Speaker, is at stake for a hit and miss approach on this matter. Mr. Speaker, let me now deal with our vision. Our vision for a good life for all Guyanese has been temporarily interrupted by these elections. That theme permeated every budget from 2015 to 2019 that was done by the Honorable Winston Acosta Jordan. Mr. Speaker, every year of the budget, the theme included the good life. It was either the good life continues, the good life beckons, but all of it had a central theme which was called the good life, and that is called vision. That is where you're able to project, and that is something, my friend, you need to have some vision. If you keep your mouth closed long enough, you may understand something. Mr. Speaker, this budget, unfortunately, does not outline a vision. You cannot discern a path that we will take to achieve the plan for prosperity. These are just like words put together. This budget, which was hurriedly done and without proper consultation, takes much of what former Minister Wilson Jordan would have done, a real Minister of Finance and his team, to have this matter dealt with. Mr. Speaker, our vision for the Guyanese people, entitled A Decade of Development 2020 to 2029, encompasses sound and professional study and widespread consultation. We have begun to set out that vision, which is now temporarily interrupted. That vision, Mr. Speaker, is based on four main pillars, namely the green state, the digital state, the education nation, and a petroleum state. Mr. Speaker, our MPs would have, throughout these last few days, given you elements of that vision, elements of those plans. Our people have done so. And Mr. Speaker, this is a document which is called A Decade of Development. And this, the Green State. The Green State. So, Mr. Speaker, our intention is to bring this Decade of Development document. We're going to make it a white paper, and we will bring it in the National Assembly for consultation further. Mr. Speaker, our work has already started, and shortly we will come to this House with that white paper. Mr. Speaker, we believe that all people of Guyana have a right to say how they see their future and be part of the delineation of that developmental path. This is our approach, Mr. Speaker, an inclusionary one. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2020 falls short of the key objectives of enhancing social cohesion, guaranteeing the peace and security of our people, justice, and a practical methodological approach to dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. And for these reasons stated, Mr. Speaker, unless there is a willingness on the part of the government to review the allocation to the sectors I've identified, I cannot, on this side of the House, support this budget. Mr. Speaker, finally, let me say that it has been a tradition in this House which the other side has insisted upon when we were in office. That is, that the leader of the opposition is the penultimate speaker. And they insisted upon it. Mr. Speaker, this is not the case here. Added to this, Mr. Speaker, the vulgar abuse by the Minister of Public Works on the Honorable among the Walton Desir is unacceptable. Mr. Speaker, in light of those circumstances, we in the opposition side wish to thank you for listening to our presentations and for ruling in the way you did. My good friend, the Honorable Prime Minister, in deference to you, some of my colleague MPs have decided that they will stay. But generally speaking, because of the points I have raised, I cannot stay. I cannot sit anymore based on what has happened here. And then those MPs who consider it an honor to listen to the maiden speech of the Honorable Prime Minister, you are free to do so. I thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.